Is it terrible being old?
Well, it also isn't great having brain surgery.
Oh,
my neurosurgeon doesn't think riding the horses is a good idea.
They want to see who can absorb the maximum amount of pain and still show up the next day. I mean, I think that's what their trial is.
I might as well just hit myself in the head with a brick for a year.
I know the feeling. Unfortunately, I know the feeling.
Maybe that caused the brain damage. I don't know. Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. And I did have an experience writing. I wrote an article about what it's like to be a Jeopardy contestant.
Oh, how'd you do?
If the agent likes your book today, it's going to get published 2 years from now. I said, yeah, I had brain surgery. I don't know how.
I might be dead in 2 years. How dare you?
Tomorrow is not a lock, as I tell people.
Hi, everybody. This is Dan and Dante. Welcome to another episode of Middle Age Mess, the show for people who still know how to program a VCR. Okay, so I'm a little excited today because I normally try and be funny on these shows, usually unsuccessfully, but I try. But today I have Jim Flynn. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Jim has written 8 humor books, which means he's 1,000 times funnier than me. And I don't have to do jack. I'm just going to sit here and let you be funny, Jim. I hope you're ready to go.
Well, I've written 4 humor books and 4 novels, so maybe I'm only 500 times as funny.
Okay, look, that's a good line. We've already started out with a good line. I'm excited. All right, the podcast is over. Okay, but before we get into that, I kind of like to find out like people's background, like where they grew up, how they became who they are in front of me today. So where are you from? Give me a little background on you.
I'm from Connecticut. I live in a different part. Connecticut's a small state. People think it's all one thing, but it isn't.
It's just rich guys. Isn't it just rich guys with venture capital funds?
I grew up in the rich guy, although I wasn't a rich kid, but I grew up in the rich guy area, Fairfield County. That's where all the hedge fund managers live.
Is that Greenwich?
It's near Greenwich. I grew up in a place called Norwalk. We thought of ourselves as a suburb of New York City.
Exactly.
We didn't identify with Connecticut. Nobody from there ever went to Hartford. Hartford was like Minnesota. Right. Nobody ever went there.
Well, I don't know. Connecticut's like Canada. It doesn't exactly exist. It's just.
Yeah. Well, that's what people think from outside. But now I live in rural Northwest Connecticut, almost in Massachusetts. Very different. I live on 29 acres. I have a couple horses on a farm.
What's the closest human being to you, Jim?
Well, I have neighbors, but you can't see them.
Okay, that's a positive.
Yeah.
That's good. Why do you like living out in the country? Like most people would be a little bit, bored maybe?
Well, we lived
isolated?
in the burbs, the suburbs of Hartford while our kids were growing up. And we decided we wanted to have horses, and we moved out. 29 acres in where I lived would cost about $1 billion. So we, maybe a golf course, but 29 acres here is something we could afford. And we wanted to have the rural life, so we chose to do that 24 years ago.
So are you on your horses every day? Are you like a farmer-ish type of guy?
I take care of the horses. I don't ride anymore for reasons we might get into, but they're just pets now.
It sucks being old, doesn't it, Jim? Is it terrible being old?
Well, it also isn't great having brain surgery.
Shit. Okay.
Yeah, my neurosurgeon doesn't think riding the horses is a good idea.
Probably not the best idea. But let me go a little more background. So you grew up in Connecticut, and I mean, were you always like angling for a writing career, or like what? Who were you?
Well, I thought about it. I had kind of two minds, and thought maybe I wanted to be a sports writer. And
me too.
Me too. One of my big writing influences was Sports Illustrated. Sports Illustrated come on Thursday, and they had great writers, Dan Jenkins and Frank DeFord.
The best writers of all time. So I also want to be a sports writer. I grew up in Los Angeles, and there was a columnist named Jim Murray.
Oh, sure.
Right? From
Connecticut. He went to Trinity College.
Exactly. And for sure, the greatest sports columnist in the history of sports columns. And I used to read him every week. And I dreamed I wanted to be him so bad. I wanted to be able to talk like him and write like him so bad. And I think now I've gotten to the point where I'm about 45% as good as him. And I'm proud. I'm proud of that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
he was great.
Yeah, not bad.
He was great. I remember his famous line after Indianapolis 500 was, "Gentlemen, start your coffins." Because that's when things weren't safe, before they had initiated all the safety stuff and guys were getting killed all the time.
No, totally. The thing I loved is that he just ripped on everybody. He ripped on every city. He ripped on every person. I mean, and I would read these articles and I'd be like, and I'd hate Oakland with them. It was so fantastic. So did you ever do any sports writing, or that was
Well,
just a dream?
I did a little bit. I actually got paid, as a stringer to submit some articles. But then I went off on a different direction, got into business, made a living and supported my kids, that kind of stuff.
Well, if you
So,
come from Connecticut, you have to go into the financial business, right? You're required, or you
well,
get
yeah, that's
kicked out of the state into Massachusetts.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of financial types in Connecticut. Between the people who go to New York and Hartford having all those insurance companies, there's a lot of financial stuff in Connecticut.
So is that what you were doing? Were you commuting to New York for 30 some odd years?
No, no, I was a retail stockbroker in Hartford.
Got it.
I commuted to Hartford,
Ooh.
the big city.
Yeah. So you were cold calling for a little while there.
I was for a while, yeah, and that was just an awful, terrible thing to do. They
It's-
don't do it anymore
Yeah, it's tough. It's
because
tough.
everybody's on the don't call list.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, it was a really terrible system and the way to get started. And I started at one of the big firms, and their attrition rate was, I think, 90% in every 5 years.
Yeah. Well,
So if they hired 100 people, 90 of them would be gone within 5 years because it was so brutal way to get started.
Well, look, I know a lot of guys in the financial industry, and the intensity of those motherfuckers is crazy. I mean, they almost want to root you out. They want to see who can absorb the maximum amount of pain and still show up the next day. I mean, I think that's what their trial is.
Yeah, I remember showing up the second day. I'm not kidding. That was the hardest day.
Right. Right.
Because the first day, you go through training and you learn all these rules and stuff and learn about securities. But then, okay, it's your first day. Here's a phone. You don't have any customers. Go get some.
Yeah.
So you don't really know what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
The second day, you know what it's like. The first day.
That's right. You got to get out of bed. You got to get on the subway. You're like, fuck, what am I doing with my life?
I can compare it to, I had 2 knee replacements.
Oh.
3 months apart. That's the closest they'll do them. I needed both of them replaced. They don't do 2 of them at once because they can't rehab if you don't have any knees. So the hard operation is the second one because you know what's coming.
Yeah. No, totally.
They say, oh, you'll have a little soreness the next day. Yeah, a little soreness.
They say the same thing when you get what's the word for when they neuter you? I'm zoning on the word.
Oh, yeah.
Vasectomy. This is how old I am. I can't remember the word vasectomy anymore. Yeah. That's what they say with a vasectomy. They're like, it's just like a little pinch. Like if a little pinch is a donkey kicking you in the stomach, yeah, it's a little pinch.
Well, I'll give you part of my new book, which is when you're going to have brain surgery, they don't tell you about the drilling beforehand. They say they are kind of vague and use jargon.
Are
We're
you
going to
awake?
just do a side. No, not for this one. We're going to do a cytocranial brainectomy, da da da. So you're kind of out of it. Okay, it's fine. Then afterwards, they tell you, we used a drill bit about the same size you used to bore holes through drywall.
Oh my God! At least it's not a bandsaw. I mean, I guess
that's actually true. I mean, it looks like the thing that cores out. You ever put a pipe through drywall?
I don't think I want to talk about it anymore. Let's change subjects.
That's what the drill bit looks like.
What's interesting, by the way, just for a real quick tangent here, like when we talk about cold calling, because by the way, I've been a lawyer my whole life, but like weirdly, my brother convinced me to get into our family business for a year way back in the day, and I cold called for a year, and I hated every single minute of it, but it taught me how to talk to people. It taught me how to create relationships and connections. But the interesting thing for guys our age, and I'm guessing you're maybe 6 or 7 months older than me, is that you talk to kids today.
I'll be 74 in January. So.
18 years, 6 months. It's all about the same.
Yeah.
We look alike, so it's fine. But it's weird that like when we talk about those common experiences of starting jobs, way back 20, 30, 40 years ago, and we talk about cold calling, we understand kids today, they don't even know what cold calling is. Like they have no idea. Well, and nor could they ever in a million years imagine them even making one call to somebody they don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a different world. And I'm not one of these. I remember when I started and the old guys would say, oh, this is nothing compared to what it was like.
Right.
We had to, we used tin cans to communicate our trades to Wall Street. And I always promised I would never be like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not going
Unfortunately,
to say, oh, these kids have it so easy.
no, I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm just saying how different it is. And unfortunately, you found
It's
yourself
different. It's
right.
just
You
different.
found
Yeah.
yourself on a podcast called Middle Age Mess. So that's the way us middle-aged old men talk about is how things were so different back then and what we went through. But it is interesting. Like I talked to my kids today about, and I've told my kids who are 19 and 20 or 20 and 21 about sitting on a phone and picking up a phone and dialing numbers and getting somebody who didn't know you and talking to them. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking? Like that's never happened in history. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the way we used to do it.
And well, I would tell you, I had a completely different experience. I didn't learn anything. I hated every minute of it.
Okay.
All of my clients, all of my good clients, none of them came through cold calling.
Okay.
I just stumbled into one who referred me to another, and through serendipity or guys quitting, leaving the business.
Right.
Guys would quit, leave the business, say, "Here's my list of customers. You know, you're a decent guy.
There's something to be said for just keep showing up. You just keep showing up, and sometimes good shit happens to you eventually.
That's honestly what happened. Cold calling was completely. I might as well just hit myself in the head with a brick for a year.
I know the feeling. Unfortunately, I know the feeling.
Maybe that caused the brain damage. I don't know.
No, well, look, it's now 25 years later. I remember how great it is. During that 1 year I was doing it, I was like you. I mean, I was calling the suicide hotline every night. So I know the feeling. Now with some perspective, I go, oh, that was great. But at the time. Anyway.
Well, you know what? I had quit a good job.
What was the job you quit?
I was in, say, computer sales.
Okay.
And could have worked for some of the big companies and made $1 million in the stock options. But anyhow, I didn't do that. And I had 3 kids. And I just said, I got to keep going back. I can't just quit after 2 months. I got to just keep doing it.
Yeah,
so
those little fuckers want to get fed like every single day. It's a pain in the ass.
greedy. They're greedy.
Yeah, pain in the ass. Okay, all right. So you finished your financial career. Now, did you have designs on writing while you were doing that?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a writer. And I did have an experience writing. I wrote an article about what it's like to be a Jeopardy contestant.
Oh, shit. How'd you do?
I bet it all on the last question and got it wrong. And Alex kind of made fun of me for getting it wrong.
What were you in first place?
It feels really bad.
Were you in first place?
I didn't like Alex even when I went on. I liked him even less. Say again?
Were you in first place for the last Final Jeopardy?
No, it was close. So it was close between all of us got the question wrong. And the guy who had $400 more than me won with $400 because he bet it all except for $400.
Son of a bitch.
It was a really hard question. I'm not going to tell you. You don't want to waste 15 minutes. It was a hard question.
Okay,
it was kind of obscure.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it was published in the Hartford Courant, which is the big newspaper in Connecticut.
Right.
We used to have newspapers back then.
Yeah.
For one thing, I had no idea what it was like to get published. I called the editor of the Sunday magazine and I said, I got a secretary. And she said, we get, I forget what the number was, 1,500 unsolicited articles every week. What's your article about?
Right.
I said, about being a contestant on Jeopardy. All right. Okay. She was totally blowing me off. 5 minutes later, the guy called back. I love Jeopardy. Do you have a rough draft? And I lied and said yes, because I had like a envelope and a napkin. So that night I stayed up all night typing my 3,000 words or whatever it was. And I got published and I got paid $2,000.
Woo!
Which was 30 years ago.
That's big money.
That's big money for a rookie.
Shit, that was a hell of an article.
Well, it was a good article. It was funny. I have a self-deprecating sense of humor, and I made fun of myself for losing, and I made fun of Alex, and it was a really great. The experience of the writing and doing that was much better experience than being on Jeopardy, which is kind of brutal. It's hard being on Jeopardy. It's a lot harder standing up there than it is sitting at home in the Barca Lounger.
Yeah, no, I'm sure, and I'm sure your brain must go blank like the whole time too.
That's not it. The buzzer.
Oh, the buzzer.
Yeah, because you a lot of the questions, all three of the people knew the answer.
Oh,
it's
so
like a drag race.
It's being the fastest. It'd be the fastest on the buzzer.
Yeah, well, not just the fastest. There's a light that goes off. You can't see this at home until the light goes on. Your buzzer isn't activated till the light goes on because you have to wait for him to stop, be done reading the question.
Right.
You can't go in the middle of, where the question pops up. You have to wait till it's done reading. A light comes on. Your buzzer doesn't work until then. And if you watch Jeopardy, you can see people jerking the buzzer.
Yeah.
That's because they go in too soon and it locks them out.
Shit, Jim, we gotta
So
have a whole podcast just about Jeopardy. Kidding me?
yeah, it's one of those. I don't know if you're an athlete at all, but you're in the big game,
Yeah.
and at the end of the game, it was like the whole game took 5 minutes. It's over now.
Right.
That's what Jeopardy feels like. It's like it's over. We lost.
Yeah.
Well, how could that have happened? Yeah, that's what it's like.
Oh, wow. So so you write this article and you make
Yep.
$2,000, which is a big number for just a random article way back
Yep.
then. Did anything come out of that? Or that was just a standalone thing, it happened, anomalous, and like whatever, you moved on?
Well, I got fan mail. I got people calling me up who didn't know me.
Okay.
People say, "Oh, you should be a writer." But even if you got $2,000 for every article, I would have had to write a lot of articles to put food on the table. So I knew that I couldn't quit my job and be a writer. So I just put it in the back of my mind. Said, when I retire, I'll start writing again.
What year did you retire?
2017.
Okay. And how quickly after you retired did you have the first book written?
6 months.
Oh, wow. Now,
I had actually been working on it in my head
okay.
on the way home for years.
Was that one of the novels or one of the humor books?
No, that was one of the funny books.
Okay. What was that one?
It's a humorous. It's called "Be Sincere Even When You Don't Mean It." It was pretty successful for first out of the box.
So I'm going to ask you,
I had no idea what I was doing.
Okay, I'm going to ask you because we have a little shared history. So I wrote 3 books. I had 3 books published. I wrote the first book when I was a lawyer. I was not a writer. I'd always like you, I wanted to write a book. So I had just gotten married, and it was right after September 11th. I got married right around September 11th. So I went from like one disaster to another. And so I'm having in New York on October, the month after, and I was talking to my cousin, and I was talking about women because I had just gotten married, and I was kind of pissed. So I was bashing on women, like I finally got sucked into this whole marriage thing. And he was laughing. He goes, "You know what, dude?" He's like, "You're such an asshole. You should write a book about being an asshole." And I thought that was the greatest idea I'd ever heard. And so I went back to my hotel, and I started writing a book called The Complete Asshole's Guide to Handling Chicks. Just totally randomly. And me and a buddy of mine ended up helping me out, or we started writing it together just because it was going to be funny. And we sent it out to 47 agents, and we were 0 for 47. And then somebody sent to the 48th agent. We were literally about to self-publish, and they had rejected it. Okay, it was been rejected by the first reader. And then these 2 young agents walk into the office. This is in New York. And they see a book on the top of the stack of the rejected called The Complete Asshole's Guide to Handling Chicks. Well, of course, guys are going to read that book, right? So these 2 guys pull this manuscript off the rejected slab. They're reading it in their cubicle, and they're laughing their ass off. And so the main guy, the CEO of the company who represented Jerry fucking Seinfeld, walks in, hears 2 guys laughing and says, "What are you guys laughing at?" They're like, "Well, we just rejected a book. It's the funniest fucking book we've ever read in our lives, called The Complete Asshole's Guide to Handling Chicks." He takes it, walks into his office, 10 minutes later called us, signed us. We had a book deal a month later.
And then what happened?
And then we sold 75,000 copies.
Well, that's pretty good.
No, it was awesome. And then I got picked up by an agency, and I got optioned by Fox, and I was like a hot young writer, and I got ensconced in the whole entertainment industry, and it was the most disgusting, horrific industry ecosystem I'd ever been involved with in my life. And I said, fucking adios. I can't deal with this world at all. It was just not a world.
I can't remember the quote from Hunter S. Thompson.
Yeah.
But he basically said the same thing. Just the worst people in the world.
It's just horrible.
Yeah.
And I love writing. I loved writing. I loved writing that book. I wrote 2 books later, and they ended up getting published like with smaller houses. But but the question I have for you after rambling on with my own narcissistic story, how did you, as a nobody, as a non-writer, as not a celebrity, as not a big name, manage to get a book published?
Well, I self-published. Yeah,
well, there you go.
I went through Amazon. Amazon, the world changed, excuse me, since you did your book.
Right.
Amazon sells 70% of all books. When you were sending your manuscript out, there were 12 big publishing houses. There's 5 now.
Right.
And I talked to people, and they said, agent, it takes 2 years. If the agent likes your book today, it's going to get published 2 years from now. I said, yeah, I had brain surgery. I don't know how
I might be dead in 2 years. How dare you?
Tomorrow is not a lock, as I tell people.
Yeah.
I'm just going to publish it myself on Amazon. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know you could publish a book. I thought it had to be an e-book.
Right.
No, you can publish a paperback. I thought you had to, like in the old days, self-published meant you paid somebody to print your book. That's not how it works with Amazon.
Oh, they
print
don't?
it.
I assume that's
No,
what it
no.
meant. So what does that mean?
No.
What do you?
They print on demand. If you sell 10 copies to your relatives, they just print 10 copies.
So what about the
I
graphics
talked
of
to
it? What about like the cover and the back cover?
you have to do that.
Okay. And so you submit, you basically send a fucking Word document with the graphics and everything to Amazon, and it just
yeah, it's a little fancier than Word document, but basically that's it.
God bless Jeff Bezos. What a wonderful human being.
But I have no complaints about Amazon. Some people complain. I have no complaints. They're completely honest with me. They send me my royalty checks. I mean, I have no way. It's kind of cool to get a royalty check from Japan.
Totally. So how many books did you sell? Of the first book, how many sold?
The first book, a few thousand, which is pretty good for self-published.
I think that's really good for self-publishing, isn't it?
Yeah. And no advertising, all word of mouth.
So how did you market? What does word of mouth mean for you? Who were you talking to?
Just people recommending it to other people.
Oh, so you didn't do interviews? You didn't go out and do nothing?
I didn't do any podcasts then. I didn't even know about podcasts.
So you must be pretty excited to sell a couple thousand copies. I mean, that sounds great to me.
That was pretty cool. And one of the big differences, did you get an advance when you wrote your book?
I was signed with like one of those big 5 publishers. Yeah. I was with one of them.
But so they gave you money up front.
Yeah.
And then you earned money based.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a big advance because, again, we were nobodies, and we did not expect to sell 75,000 copies at all. So we had a pretty small advance.
I'm sure they didn't either.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty shocking. It was pretty shocking.
But the deal on Amazon is you get much more per book than you would get at a publishing house.
Right.
Because you're not splitting with an agent. It's just you and Amazon.
Well, so let me ask you, off 2,000 copies, like how much money did you make?
$5,000 maybe.
I mean, that sounds kind of good to me. Like to self-publish a book and make $5,000, like I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it was a little more than that.
Okay.
Well, my objective was I wanted to make enough money to pay for my golf for next year. Okay. And I play at a municipal course that isn't expensive. You get a season pass. So I way overperformed my objective.
You outkicked your coverage, as they say.
Yeah, I outkicked the coverage. Yeah. The best part about it was I picked up some actual writers as fans.
Oh, that's good.
People who wrote me fan mail, who are like New York Times best-selling authors.
Oh my God.
Got a few of those.
It's amazing.
Hey, you're really funny. Keep writing. That's pretty encouraging. But a couple of you said, oh, you should write a novel. If you can get an agent, you can sell 1 million copies, you can do all that stuff. So I went off the short humorous books and wrote a novel. And so I've written 4 novels. They're pretty good.
Yeah.
But they're not as successful as the short funny books. There's a lot of reasons for that. Now you hit the humor thing, but one of the reasons is so anybody can submit a novel, a book to Amazon. And as long as it isn't like threatening to kill people or some really crazy stuff, they'll publish it.
That's like 80% of what I write. So it might be a little bit of a problem for me.
Well, don't. Yeah. But, like really crazy stuff. I won't even going to mention because I don't want to. But if you don't do that, they have certain requirements you can't violate. But they'll publish anything. And there's a lot of garbage on Amazon. But they get like 1,000 books a day.
Unbelievable.
1,000 books a day. So and most of them are novels. So you're competing with all those books, all those novels. It's really tough. And you're not only competing with some other schmo from down the street, but you're competing with Stephen King and, John Grisham and all those guys.
Well, look, and that's why I stopped. Our first book did really well. I was excited about it. I didn't write for a while after that because of the kind of the entertainment industry. But I knew that. I mean, writing is one of the most competitive things in the world. To get a book published back then was almost impossible. Yep. Now it's probably impossible. And even if you did get it published, again, we sold 75,000 copies and we probably made, I'm going to say between the two of us, me and my co-author, was 60, 70 grand,
Yep.
which was really good.
Yeah, it's great.
But like, I didn't think I'd ever sell 75,000 copies again. My second book sold like 10,000, and then my third book sold like 2, I think, maybe. But it's like,
You're supposed to go in the other direction.
I know, I kind of fucked out. I always do things the opposite for some reason. But no, when people talk about writing, they forget how many thousands and thousands and thousands of books come out. And to get yourself above the noise without being a celebrity or an athlete or whatever is virtually impossible.
Well, yeah, that's a sure way. If you're Prince Harry, you can pretty much get published. But publishers will not take unsolicited manuscripts anymore. You have to have an agent.
Right. Back then,
They
look,
just
30
send
years
them
ago
back.
it was the same thing. Yeah.
So I did the novel thing, and I got some good reviews. I didn't sell as many copies, and but I do have some fans. I have some real fans. People who really like this character, and this is a series, the same guys in all 4 books. I got to the point. Somebody said, "You really need to get an agent.
Right.
You need to." So you went through the dance. You send out all these letters and all that stuff, and you go through the dance. And I got in the door of a big time agent.
Yeah.
Which really surprised me, because you're used to basically you send it out, it's like sending it into a black hole. They never even get back to you.
Yeah, they don't give a shit.
So I got back this big time agent woman who sold books to the big houses, and they've been made into Netflix series and movies and all this stuff. Real big time agent. Oh, let me see the first chapter. Send the first chapter. You go through all this stuff, send the manuscript, and ultimately it got rejected. But I could handle that because I said, I'm going to write another funny book.
Yeah,
and I wrote
fuck
a book.
you, Agent Curl. I'm going to go do something myself.
Well, I didn't feel that way. No,
I feel that way, Jim. I'm fucking pissed off at her.
I didn't feel that way. I honestly felt like the book wasn't good enough. I didn't feel like, an awful lot of writers think, oh, it's Amazon, it's the agents, the book's not good enough.
Yeah.
It's a business. If they think the book will sell, they're going to buy the book. And so I looked at it and said, it's pretty good. And I have some people who really like it, but I understand what's wrong with it. And I actually I had 3 novels in that series. I pulled them off. Right. I'm going to rewrite them. They're not good enough. I don't think they're good enough.
Oh, wow.
So I'm writing the 4th because I learned an awful lot in the last 6 years about how to write a book. But in the meantime, I wrote a book about golf called Hit Your Second Shot First.
I probably say that 47 times around, Jim.
Well, I always said I'm going to write a book. Hit Your Second Shot First.
That's a good idea.
Well, you should buy the book when we get off.
Yeah. Or maybe I'll write one and I'll just supplant you, Jim, just to piss you off.
Well, there are other books. As you probably know, you can't copyright a book title.
Oh, you can't?
You cannot.
Is that true? Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
No, the only exception is I can't write a book called The Godfather and sell it and have people think they're buying The Godfather.
Look, as long as you don't write The Complete Asshole's Guide to Handling Chicks, Jim, I'm cool with you.
I could do that, and you couldn't do anything about it.
That's probably true.
But I have no expertise in that area.
Yeah, so. I'm like a genius when it comes to being an asshole. Yeah. The world's foremost asshole, as they say.
But anyhow, I write Hit Your Second Shot First, and it's about golf. So guess what? People buy it on Father's Day and Christmas because they don't know what to give the old man.
So tell me about the book. Tell me, what's the basis for the book? Is it a story or is it just a series of one-liners?
No, it's not a story. It's just it's more or less a stand-up comedy act.
Got it. How long is it?
And it's 20,000 words. The novels are like 100,000 words. You work your ass off.
Right.
You sell 500 copies. This one, I think it sold 20,000 copies.
You sold 20,000 copies of your golf book?
And it still sells every day.
Oh, shit. Jim, you're
a successful
writer.
In the world.
You're like Stephen King. That's awesome.
Well, not quite, but it sells everywhere they speak English. Hasn't been translated. So I'll get a thing at the end of the month. Amazon sends you, hey, you're going to get a payment from South Africa. You're going to get a payment. They do it by country.
Wow.
So I'll get a payment from Japan. I sold 2 books there last month or something. But everywhere in the world, the book sells every day somewhere in the world.
What do you attribute that success to? That's a very successful book. Look, I'll tell you what, when I was doing my thing 30 years ago, they said to me, if you sell over 20,000 copies, I believe you're like in the top 1% of books in the country.
Oh, yeah. Yep. 2,000, you're in the top 5%.
Right. I mean, so that's like a remarkable sales volume for a self-published book.
Yep. Well, why? It's funny. It's got a great cover. It's short, and it's about golf. People search for golf books. My old man's a golfer. What do how many golf ties can I give him?
Yeah.
So they search for it. It's got all these good reviews. People recommend it to each other. My funny books, people buy multiple copies.
Okay.
They give them out as presents, or they'll give them to the guys they work with or something like that.
So of the other, where do you come up with the ideas for the funny books? The golf one I understand because I'm out there all the time, pissed off. I could write 80 pages about hating that game easily. Where do you come up with your ideas?
Well, let's see. Be sincere even when you don't mean it was an extension of my Jeopardy thing. My wife said, "Oh, write it like the Jeopardy article." Well, I basically had only done one interesting thing in my life, so I had to make up all the other stuff.
Come on, Jim, don't sell yourself short. I'm sure you got to. If I had another 40 minutes with you, I'd dig something interesting out of you for sure.
What? So this guy is kind of like a Walter Mitty. He's a genius. He becomes an astrophysicist, an astronaut, plays in the Super Bowl by serendipity. He's a great athlete, and he comes from a rich family. He's an interesting character. It's a funny book. If you read this book, I guarantee you'll laugh. I guarantee you'll laugh at this book.
I
And
like
you're
it.
the right age to do it. It's not your kids or even my kids. For example, this guy plays for Stanford in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State, and Woody Hayes throws the yard markers out in the field.
I mean,
Well,
I
my
get
son
it.
read it.
I get it. He had no
My
idea.
son
what it was
read
like.
it, who's 41 years old now,
Yeah,
said, was there a guy named Woody Hayes?
exactly.
Didn't
Was
know.
there something called the Rose Bowl? What the hell's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, little did we know they'd be in the Big Ten now.
Oh, what a disaster.
And it's funny because this was written a long time ago, but I say, the character says, the way the conferences are going, UCLA is going to be in the Big Ten, and the Sorbonne is going to join the
I like it.
Pac, and that's the way the conferences are going. Anyhow, this guy has all these, does all these things that I thought would be cool things to do. It would be cool to be an Apollo astronaut. He's an Apollo astronaut. He does the Hawaii triathlon. He plays in the Masters tournament. Through all this serendipitous stuff, it's not supposed to be totally believable, but it is. It is funny,
Right. That's all that matters. As long as it's funny, you can deal with anything.
and that's why it's sold, because it's funny.
Are you still writing today, Jim? Is this something you keep doing until you drop?
Yes. And here's my latest book right here.
You look good for your age. Okay. What's it about?
Well, so I picked up these people who are kind of my unofficial mentors, and they read my stuff. And one of them lives in France. The other one lives in California. One's a woman, one's a man. They don't know each other. And both of them have said to me, "Have you ever thought about doing stand-up comedy? Because your rhythm is like a stand-up comedian.
Right.
It's not a novelist rhythm. It's more like a stand-up comedy, because your funny books are really funny. You should get out and do stand-up comedy." I said, I'm old. I've had brain surgery. I don't know if I want to get up
Maybe
in
that
front
would be
of
good. I'd love to hear the old brain-damaged comedian come out. That'd be fantastic.
Well, that's actually chapter 2 in the book.
Okay,
I talk about brain surgery.
Right on.
But anyhow, they said, you should do that. And I'm not making this part up. This is true. So I said, okay, I'll consider that. So I'm writing novel. And I use artificial intelligence not to write. I use it as an editor.
Right.
I don't know. Do you use it at all?
I use it a little bit. I'm too old to deal with it. I'm not young like you. I don't.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, these newfangled technology is too much for me.
I actually think it's great, and I think people have to learn how to use it. And Skynet may take over the world. They may not need people. I mean, it's so powerful. It's so impressive. Anyhow, I use it as an editor. So I'll send a chapter and say, make comments on this. Did I use too much dialogue? Did I do all this stuff? And this is true. I am not making this up. I sent a chapter up, and ChatGPT wrote back to me. This was Chat's comment. "Have you ever thought of doing stand-up comedy?"
Jim, we're doomed, right? I mean, we're doomed.
Yeah.
There's no way we're ever going to be as good as AI. I mean, once it takes over, that's it. We're all going to be stuck on a farm in Connecticut.
So I said, now, it's one thing for the people to try. I mean, now this all-knowing algorithm is telling me to write stand-up comedy. So I decided.
If Elon Musk's pet project tells you should be a comedian, then you should be a comedian for sure.
Yeah. So I said, I'm not. For one thing, I live out in the woods, as I say in my book. The only gig I could get would be opening for the accordion player at the nursing home
That's,
on
I've got
bingo
one.
night.
I mean,
Yeah,
could be
so
worse, you know?
and I don't wanna get up in front of a bunch of drunk millennials, have them throw beer bottles at me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna write a book that is 10 stand-up acts. And
Oh,
you're probably old enough to have sat and listened to a comedy album.
oh, of course, man. My favorite
Yeah.
album was Andrew Dice Clay back in 1991, I think. I had Red Fox
Red
albums
Fox.
back when I was a little kid. Back when I was a little
Yeah,
kid.
yeah, wow, that you were a very advanced little kid.
I
'Cause
was. I
Red
was. That was
Red was a
Sanford.
little
Sanford and
Red was
Son,
a
man.
little dirty.
Yeah, that's what I loved about it. You know, I think he taught me how to say fuck when I was like 5 years old. It was
Yeah,
fantastic.
I was doing Flip Wilson and George Carlin when he was still clean and
Flip
on
Wilson, was that
TV.
Ernestine? Did he have Ernestine? Is that no, that was Lily Tomlin. Who was Flip Wilson's female character?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I can't remember her
Georgine
name.
or anyway. All right, Jim, where do we find your books? All of them on Amazon, I guess. I guess that's what we do, right?
Yes, on Amazon. My website is jimflynn6six.com,
Okay.
and then you can you can read about me and
Why are you
click
Jim
over to
Flynn
my
6? Are you
books.
the sixth? Are you Jim Flynn the sixth?
Well, that's a great question. Well, so I published my first book. Had no idea what I was doing. Published a book. I go on the next day looking for my name. There's all these other books by Jim Flynn. I find out I'm the sixth one.
That's
Jim
fantastic.
Flynn is not the least common name in the world. It's like Joe Smith kind of.
That is
So,
fantastic.
I mean, there's a guy named Jim Flynn who wrote The History of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers,
Jesus
which was
Christ.
not a bestseller.
I mean, that's definitely a comedy book, though, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is before they ever won. So
Yeah.
this is when they wore the orange good humor uniforms. But
I remember. Yeah.
so anyhow, I'm the sixth guy named Jim Flynn who has a book on Amazon. So that's how I became Jim Flynn
6. I love it. Well, here's what I love about you, Jim, and that's what this podcast is all about. You got a couple of years of me, yeah, but it's about when we get older and like the things we've been doing our whole lives are done, and we're not a dad. We don't see ourselves as dad, or there's a lot of things that we've seen ourselves as for decades that we're just not anymore. And the question is like, what do you do with your time in this last quarter or last half of your life that's going to, make you productive and make a mark in the world? And for guys like you who spent a lifetime raising a family and fucking cold calling to make a couple bucks to make sure your kids could eat and have a roof over their head. When you're finally done with it, you say, you know what? My dream is to write, and I'm going to sit down and fucking do it. And to write 8 books that sell well and that you're getting paid a couple bucks on and that you're enjoying your life and you have a reason to be productive and get up every morning. That's the reason I started this podcast, because of guys like you.
The cool thing is I'm never bored.
Yeah.
And I'm always pushing myself, go for the next frontier. And the next frontier for me is to do an audiobook version of my latest book.
Right. And I
So
love that.
I'm doing the narrating of the book, which it's hard. It's not easy to do that.
Yeah,
so
I can imagine. Well, I love guys like you who go out there and pursue their dreams, in their later years, because look, we don't have to become irrelevant. We don't have to just disappear into, a bar or whatever. We can still do things that will make a big impact. And you've done that. And I appreciate you. And thanks for coming on the show.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, Jim. And we'll look for your books, Jim Flynn 6. And he's got 8 different books on Amazon. And don't forget to subscribe, Middle Age Mess. Go and do a couple good reviews on Amazon for Jim as well, Jim 6. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.